That siren means it's an emergency show. No, we don't have a show scheduled today, but yes, we are having a show. Yes, we are talking. Yes, we have a lot to talk about. Because as we speak at 4:30 Eastern Time, 1:30 Pacific Time on Friday, Oregon and Washington have invitations to the Big Ten. They're expected to accept them. We don't yet know what happens with Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah, but it appears the Pac-12 is as on life support as a conference can be. And we have a lot to discuss because this is one of those things that we saw coming last night. And then on Friday morning, there was a little pause. The Pac-12 teams that were remaining met. I think there was some negotiating going on. Perhaps, Oregon, Washington angling for a little bit bigger share because you noticed there were a couple of reports that said, oh, they've cooled on the idea of going to the Big Ten. Well, logic would tell you that if the Big Ten was offering the same or 1 penny more than the Pac-12, you're going to take the Big Ten offer. But hey, you could legitimately say, look, we could all stay together, easier path to the playoff. You could make that happen. But nobody would have believed you unless it was to get a little bit more money. We'll see what the finances are about this. I can't imagine they're getting full shares. I would imagine it's a partial share situation. But Oregon and Washington off to the Big Ten. And then we just see what happens next because we're waiting on Arizona, which Ross Dellinger reported on Thursday night that the Big 12 had essentially voted to accept Arizona if Arizona applies. But we've not seen an Arizona Board of Regents meeting notice drop. And that's sort of the next step in the order of operations because the Arizona Board of Regents is going to have to vote. This is essentially what Colorado had to do as well, where they decided, okay, we're going to move. And they had an executive session meeting and made all the decisions and then had to come back the next day and have the official public meeting where they voted to move. But we haven't seen that yet with Arizona. And remember, the Arizona Board of Regents also controls Arizona State. So are they tied together? Do they have to go together? Michael Crow, the Arizona State president, is a true believer in the Pac-12, which I don't really know how you can believe in it at this point, but he's always been a true believer in the Pac-12. So the question is, does he keep that train from going out of the station? Utah, also a piece of this because you'd think that they're going to potentially move together. But we got a lot of questions from you guys. We'll start with Steve. Does this eliminate any chance of a Cinderella in the college football playoff? When I first heard of playoff expansion, I was really hoping it would open the door for mid-level teams like the Boise's, UCFs, and others. Well, it's interesting that you mentioned that, Steve, because as currently constituted, especially if the Pac-12 either dissolves or winds up merging with the Mountain West, actually there's a chance for a second potential Cinderella type team in the playoff if the 6 highest ranked conference champs get a bid. Now, the question is, how long does that last? Because remember, the first playoff contract runs through the 2025 season. They can change it again before 2026. I imagine they would, but potentially you could have a 24 season and a 25 season where the Sun Belt champ and the Mountain West champ could get in, or the American champ and the Mountain West champ could get in. And that would actually increase the Cinderella factor. But I do think, Steve, the further you go, they'll change the dynamics so that you wouldn't be able to. Now, UCF, they're in the Big 12 now. If the Big 12 does manage to get Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah, it already was probably a 2-bid league in the playoff. It's champion plus an at-large team. That lineup, especially you add Utah to what they have, I think their chances of having a 3-bid league in a lot of years become quite possible. So, like, UCF is actually in a good position to make the playoff. All they've got to do is build that roster. And if you look at the way they're recruiting right now, I think there's a good chance that they can help. Dachshund1321, college football where nobody is in charge and nobody is qualified to be. Now, there are probably people qualified to be in charge, but the first part of the statement is absolutely correct. There is nobody in charge. I said this the other night. No one is in charge. No one knows what they're doing. If you remember that, everything in college football suddenly makes sense. And it's always been that way. And this is where you see this now. This is how this has all happened, because nobody was really in charge and nobody can stop anybody from doing this. And while we're on that topic, I do want to say this absolutely sucks for Oregon State and Washington State and for Cal and Stanford, but Oregon State, Washington State, especially passionate fan bases. Their football programs of late have done exactly what you want. Everything you want. They've put in resources. They've built facilities. They've done everything. They've done everything right. None of this is their fault. There is only whatever's left for them. And I would imagine if they lose Arizona, Arizona State, and Utah, then you're probably talking about some sort of merger with the Mountain West. And look, they can rule those leagues. They can, or be very competitive in them, but it sucks because their fans didn't do anything wrong. Their players didn't do anything wrong. Their athletic department staff didn't do anything wrong. Their football staff didn't do anything wrong. In fact, you look at what Oregon State's done under Jonathan Smith. They've done everything right. And it didn't matter. It did not matter. It is not fair and it sucks. That's all there is to it. I don't want anybody to think I'm happy about any of this. I'm covering it. It's very interesting. Are there a lot of good games now that I'm excited to see because of Oregon and Washington in the Big Ten? Yeah, I'm excited about that. But I feel so bad for those Oregon State, Washington State fans because, again, they didn't do anything wrong. This happened to them. This didn't happen because of them or because of anybody at their universities. This happened to them. And that brings me to the question from Geoff. The last two Pac-12 commissioners, worst back-to-back hires in the history of any profession, ? I have to go back and think about that. If any of you guys can think of two back-to-back hires that had worse results, I'm open to listen, because I don't know. I really don't know. It is amazing to me to think about what happened, because they were sitting here. Think about this. 2010. The Pac-12 and the then Pac-10 and the Big 12, they had their meetings out in Phoenix where they meet every year. They discuss a potential television scheduling alliance. And this puts an idea in the head of Larry Scott, who's the commissioner of the Pac-12. He's the new commissioner of the Pac-10 at the time. And he has this idea. If I take half the Big 12, if I take Texas, Texas A&M, Oklahoma, Oklahoma State, Texas Tech, and Colorado, I can create the first super conference. And he damn near did it. He was one day away from doing it. He made site visits to all the schools. What happened, basically, he gets to College Station, and one of the regents for Texas A&M pulls him aside as he's about to head to Austin. He goes, they're going to screw you, right? They're going to want to start their own network. And Larry's like, no, it's fine. Goes to Austin. Sure enough, the Longhorns want to start their own network instead of casting their third tier rights into the Pac-12 network. Deal falls apart. If that had happened, the Pac-16, had that happened, I don't know how much of this other stuff would have happened. Now, Larry always said that there would have been more consolidation, but it actually probably would have kept a few things together. Now, maybe when the Big Ten took Maryland, maybe the SEC would have moved and taken from the ACC. So maybe it would have done that to the ACC. I'm not sure. We know it would have destroyed the Big 12. But it might have caused that consolidation a lot sooner. But because that didn't happen, and it all happened in fits and starts, you didn't have anything completely drastic until Texas and Oklahoma to the SEC, USC and UCLA to the Big Ten, and now all of this. So it is amazing to me. But let's go back a couple weeks to Pac-12 Media Day. George Kliavkoff, the commissioner, talking about their media rights deal, and are they worried about losing anybody?
George, just to follow on what you just said, I think a response ago, because it caught a lot of people's attention very quickly. You just said you're not announcing a deal today on purpose because you want the attention to be on football.
Yep.
To be clear, that would imply that the deal is done and codified and just you're waiting until after today.
I think you're reading too much into that.
So then what is the purpose behind not announcing something, which is what you just said?
We want to have the focus on football today. We have an incredibly good football story to tell, and we want that to be the focus today.
And they're in the midst of falling apart now because the deal that he kept talking about was just not that good. And he kept saying, well, the longer we wait, the better it gets. No, it doesn't get any better. He got asked that same day about losing teams potentially. And he said, we're not even worried about that. We got bigger fish to fry. They've now lost 3, Colorado, Oregon, and Washington. They could potentially lose 3 more. They could be left with 4, basically. And it is crazy how they got here so quickly. But Klyavkov, lots of mistakes. I think you can go back to the beginning of his tenure. You know, they were ahead of the Big 12 in line for their media rights. So Big 12's deal doesn't end until after the 24-25 season. The Pac-12's ends after this particular school year. But they were unrealistic with their expectations of how much money they could get. They were asking for tons of money. Basically, they would look at their ratings and say, we want this percentage of what you guys gave the Big 10. But that's not how it works. The networks are willing to spend a fortune on great games. They are not willing to spend much of anything on games that they consider to be filler. So the Pac-12, as arranged there, once they lost USC and UCLA, the networks didn't see a lot of great games there. So the Big 12, with Brett Yormark, who was their new commissioner, came in with a much more realistic expectation of what they were worth. And Fox and ESPN said, okay, that's great. We'll take it. And that was that. And the Big 12, which almost blew up in 2010, almost blew up in 2011, was left for dead in 2021, is now incredibly strong, at least we think. So we'll just have to find out what that means. Right now, we don't know what's going on in Arizona. Perhaps that situation resolves itself as the night goes on or as the weekend goes on. But it does sound like Arizona and Arizona State would have to go together. And the president of Arizona State, Michael Crow, we know wants to be in the Pac-12, such as that is. I don't even know what that means. So it's interesting because everybody has an opinion on this, and most people's opinion of this, it's bad. They don't like the consolidation. They feel like it's taking away what makes college football special. And I agree with you to a point. I do agree that taking the regionality out of college football removes a lot of this special flavor, the special sauce. But there are going to be better games. When Texas and Oklahoma are in the SEC, we're going to get better games. Oklahoma, Washington, and USC going to the Big Ten gives us better games. And you can kind of tell how people, whether I don't know if it's glass half full, glass half empty type people, maybe that's the best way to describe it. If you're talking about the new Big Ten arrangement and they start talking about teams playing Rutgers, you know they're glass half empty. But they also get to play Ohio State and Michigan and Wisconsin, which is going to be kind of fun. Like Iowa, Oregon's now a game that it'll happen pretty frequently. I'm good with that. That's not a blockbuster marquee matchup, but guess what? A lot of people are going to watch that on TV. So I'm trying to look at the bright side here because, again, like when we talk about Washington State and Oregon State, there's no spinning that. It sucks. But the question is, what's next? We may have an answer to our, have there been 2 worse hires back to back? The Cleveland Browns, Hugh Jackson, followed by Freddie Kitchens as their head coaches. Kyle in the chat giving us that one. That's pretty good. Joe says Mike Riley and Scott Frost at Nebraska. I don't blame Mike Riley. I blame Sean Eichhorst for hiring him. And then Scott Frost, we all thought he'd be great. He's coming off an undefeated season at UCF. So I'm not sure that that's quite the same. But the Hugh Jackson, Freddie Kitchens thing, I feel like that's pretty close. But yeah, it is pretty incredible. And so Charlie asks, hearing now there's a possibility the Big 12 could go to 18 and bring in Arizona State, Utah, Washington State, Oregon State, all at reduced shares for I'd love that for Washington State and Oregon State. I don't know right now if that's a possibility. I hope if that's the holdup, great. I hope that's the case. And then maybe Cal and Stanford, who knows? Maybe the Big Ten, because there's Big Ten presidents who love rubbing shoulders with fellow elite academic institutions. Maybe they would want that, and then nobody gets left behind. But it feels a little too pie in the sky. I would love that. I think, this is the new frontier, though, and there's no. Rocky Top Tom says it's not even that 100 plus years rivalry and tradition are destroyed by this. Well, they don't have to be. I'll point this out again. Oregon and Oregon State can still play. Washington and Washington State can still play. No one is stopping them from playing. And it's actually probably beneficial to all parties that those games continue. I know that Oklahoma State said they're not playing Bedlam. They're not going to play Oklahoma when Oklahoma leaves for the SEC. Okay, that's your choice. But the game's not happening because of you, because Oklahoma will play it. Texas and Texas A&M were complete babies about it when Texas A&M left for the SEC. Complete babies, both sides. They all blamed each other. It was both their faults. They were babies about it. Now they're going to have to play again because they're in the same league again. Depending on what happens with Utah, if Utah goes to the Big 12, we get Utah BYU as a conference game again. I'm all right with that. But the argument that Oregon State shouldn't play Oregon, if you decide as Oregon State that you don't want to play Oregon and they want to play you, that is your fault. If Oregon won't play you, that's Oregon's fault. But if you're Oregon, look, they're right down the road. You have history. The fans love the game. Play the game. It's not that complicated. You want to play the game, play the game. So, question from Sam. Did the Pac-12 presidents and ADs handcuff George? I think it was a little bit of both. Blaming George Kliavkoff completely for everything is probably folly. Because, again, the Pac-12 presidents, and John Wilner said this on the show on Thursday, they've been different than the other presidents in other leagues. They're just less pragmatic. They're more ivory tower types. And the Big 12 presidents, probably the polar opposites, because they've been through every possible realignment scenario you can imagine, every single one. And so there is nothing that surprises them. And they've also seen the mistakes that they made along the way, or that other schools or conferences made along the way. And they were determined not to have that happen to them. The Pac-12 presidents had not been through this. They were the aggressor against the Big 12 in the scheme that didn't work out. They were not losing anybody until they lost USC and UCLA. And I think the thought was that they never would lose anybody. Why would they? Everybody's been together. Everybody likes being together. They weren't paying attention when USC was saying, hey, something's got to change here. Something's got to change here. And that's part of the problem. Is another thing that John Wilner pointed out. The two most powerful voices among those presidents for the longest time were Michael Crow, who's still at Arizona State, and Ed Ray, who was at Oregon State. Oregon State and Arizona State should not be in charge of that league. That would be like Vandy and Mississippi State being in charge of the SEC. Doesn't work that way. So that part they didn't get. They didn't get that if they didn't do anything, they were going to lose USC. Grillmaster says, this is the process to the Super League. We'll have Power 2 conferences that eventually separate from the NCAA and make a new governing body. I wouldn't be shocked if they make a new governing body anyway. They don't have to separate from the NCAA and the other sports. I think they should separate from the NCAA and football. I think the CFP or something like that should run college football. Now, if it's just the Big Ten and the SEC, and I think that's what everybody's worried about. Everybody's worried about the Big Ten takes the best what's left, the SEC takes the best what's left, and sometime in the mid 2030s, that's all you can get in terms of big time college football, and they'll suck all the oxygen out from everybody else. Jim Delaney's mentioned this, the former Big Ten commissioner. Some other people have mentioned this. You do have potential antitrust problems if you do that, and I think the Big Ten folks are very aware of that. I'm sure Greg Sankey and the SEC are very aware of that. They've been fighting antitrust stuff on the NCAA side for quite some time, so they know. Michael Grubbs, any chance the Big 12 just stops at 14 with Arizona? Well, right now, if it's true that Arizona and Arizona State have to go as a pair, no, they can't get Arizona as the 14th. Now, let's say Arizona State, and Utah decide to stay in the husk of the Pac-12 and they just backfill with other teams, then Big 12 can go on to UConn or somebody else that they might have been considering it. But I don't think that's going to wet the whistle of Fox and ESPN the way other ones would. So Rad Brad brings up the other part of this equation. And this is, let's move to the other side of the country, because this is what's going on as well. And it doesn't sound related, but it kind of is. Thoughts if Clemson and Florida State joined the SEC? I think Clemson and Florida State are great cultural fits for the SEC. I think, again, if you talk about good games, and I always look at it like, I don't know if anybody else had this, growing up in the South, you always had the magnet on the fridge with the helmet schedule. So your team, my mom went to Alabama, my dad went to South Carolina. So you'd have the South Carolina schedule magnet, the Alabama schedule magnet, and it has the helmets of all the other teams. Like, you load Florida State and Clemson helmets onto those magnets, you're watching those games. So that makes sense. But they're in the ACC, where the grant of rights feels pretty tough to get out of. They're supposed to be in the ACC till at least 2036. Florida State has said, we're going to fight that. We don't know how exactly we're going to fight that. Well, we did get a little bit of a clue. Sportico had a story on Friday saying they're basically courting private equity to raise capital for a fund to help them get out of the ACC. So I also think they're going to make a legal challenge, but we'll see. The SEC, I don't know that they have to do anything. I don't know that they have to do anything beyond 16, because even with the Big Ten going to 18, I still think the SEC's football product at 16 is better. So you don't have to do anything. And if those ACC schools are stuck, then you don't worry about it. If they can get out and the Big Ten is interested in Florida State and Clemson, and you want to block the Big Ten from getting into the South, then you should take them. Because, again, you'd watch those games. We got a special guest, former Oregon Duck Geoff Schwartz.
I'm so tired, man. I'm just tired of this. So it's I was just on with you another stream. I'm in bed now. I'm exhausted. This is exhausting, buddy.
I know. I was on the
so
stream,
tiring.
the solid verbal stream with fellow Oregon Duck Dan Rubenstein.
Is my camera better? There we go. That's better. There we go. That's better.
That's a fine headboard, by the way.
Thank you.
That
My wife's
time in the
hate
NFL.
that I did this. She's gonna hate that I'm in the bed doing this. But oh my God, this is exhausting, buddy.
Is it though?
It is when your team is involved. And my conference, I do Pac-12 radio. I cover this. You get a break. You don't have to talk about this every day if you don't want to. I've talked about this every day for basically a year now.
So when I worked for SiriusXM for 8 years and just stopped when I took this job. So Jeff and I have done this on Pac-12 radio on SiriusXM. Yes. And Jeff has given me the speech before shows because I'm not a regular on that channel. So Jeff would be like, we're not talking about the freaking TV contract today.
No, we're not. We're not. There were days I did it, not just to you, to Sean, everyone. We're not doing this today. It's mid-March. I'm we talk about anything but the TV contract. And I think I'm accepting of this, Andy, because I think it had to happen. And I do think nationally you get much better matchups, but it does suck. I don't like it. The part of college sports that we all like about the rivalries, and you'll make new ones, of course, you will, yeah. But all the story traditions, the stories, the scar tissue, the fabric of your childhood, because I grew up But my parents are Bruin alums. I went to UCLA home games since I was 5 till I was 18.
You are a Big Ten family, Geoff.
We are a Big Ten family. The funny part is, like, no one in UCLA cares. They just got dragged along to this process. No one. My dad could care less. He's like, whatever, man. I'll just watch UCLA play. I don't care who they play. It's all done. Like, it's just gone. And again, I get it. I'm not a dummy. I get the times are changing, but just like that, I just saw the announcement. Oregon's Board of Trustees is I think having a meeting in 30 minutes or so. So it's happening.
Oh, it's happening. Yeah, absolutely. Well, and your brother Mitchell played at Cal.
Yeah.
So where's he at on all this?
I don't know. He doesn't. He's not into Cal. I mean, I guess if I was my brother, I don't know if I would. Cal's off. It's something too. Like, what's Cal's like? Are they going to drop just sports? I don't know what they're going to do now. He's actually in Cleveland tonight to celebrate Joe Thomas's induction in the Hall of Fame. So I think he's not probably going to comment very much on what's happening with Cal.
I was going to say Joe's one meal a day when you get into the Hall of Fame is probably going to be really great.
Oh my, he very much deserves it. What happened to Stanford, right? Like, they're almost too good of an athletic program to be nowhere, but they're not going to the Big 12. I'll tell you that. I think eventually they're in the Big 10. I would imagine, if Notre Dame ever makes their mind up. But also too, like, what if these conferences just say, you know what, Notre Dame, we're just not going to play you anymore until you join the conference.
They're not going to do that because they love playing Notre Dame. No, they love full stadiums and TV audiences.
But it feels like Stanford will eventually get to the Big 10 when Notre Dame joins, because 18 teams is awkward. 20 makes more sense. I did see a tweet today that was like, why don't we just split the 20-team conference into a Pacific Division and a East Division, West, and like, it's like the same thing we just had. It's really funny.
Well, so when Oklahoma and Texas left for the SEC, 2 days later, I wrote that the Big Ten should take USC, UCLA, Oregon, Washington, Stanford, Cal, and make that, they would just play in football. Like, it'd be a 20-team league in football. But then for the other sports, those West Coast schools would just play each other as a conference.
Yeah.
And
agreed.
that would make sense.
Yeah. And then maybe you have 1 weekend or 2 weekends you go and play a Big Ten team, but you just keep everything out West. Not basketball, right? Olympic sports, right? Basketball, you still travel, but Olympic sport wise, you just end up playing. I mean, look, no one really does any of these deals based on Olympic sports, but it is a burden, man. It's gonna be a lot of travel and a lot of just logistically figuring out what to do. But if you're Oregon and Washington, what are you supposed to do? You to me, Andy, streaming's not the end of the world, right? I mean, look at all the NFL has a game on Peacock this year, a playoff game.
Well,
streaming only.
The SEC,
it's the money,
which brags about its TV deal. Everybody plays a game on ESPN Plus. Everybody.
But you can't have streaming and then no money, right?
Yeah.
You can't have streaming and then only $20 million. If you get $40 million, because look, the linear component to this was always going to be that, like, Oregon, Washington, they could sell to ESPN, right?
Yeah.
Utah, Oregon, they could sell to Fox.
But why would you sell the best games? Isn't that how you're getting the subscriptions to Apple?
I guess, but that's basically the idea, right? You would sell some of these games to linear, and it would be. But they've already done the subscription model. It didn't work. They tried already. Now, Apple TV is more readily available. It's easier to use.
It's a cheaper choice. You don't have to take a dish off your house, that sort of thing. Yeah.
And so, like, I have no problem with that. But when you get $20 million a year and you're well behind everyone else, and I think that Oregon and Washington look at this as like a strategic play for the future.
Yeah.
Okay, we take a little bit less money now, which I guess there's more reports they might have. Do you think this morning, when the tide flipped about 10 a.m. Eastern, that was Oregon and Washington trying to get more from the Big Ten? That's what
I tweeted that. Yeah, I absolutely think that. I have a sixth sense for when people in my line of work are being used to negotiate.
Because it was so odd. Like, I went to bed last night, and I think you're on the East Coast too. Like, I went to bed like 11 o'clock, and it was like done. I was like, okay, I'll wake up in the morning. I went to go golf, pick my buddy up who's a Rutgers alum. We were joking about Oregon in the Big Ten, going to Rutgers for the first game. I got to the golf course at 10 o'clock, and it was like, everyone the same reporters who are very good at their job were like this, or everyone's staying in the Pac-12. And it was like, what's happening? And then an hour later,
you could plausibly say it. Now, you had to be willing to actually stay, but you could plausibly say that even if they lost Arizona, you could backfill with let's say San Diego State and SMU, and you'd have a league and you could deal with it. So you could plausibly say that if you don't give us a little more, then we're not coming. And I will see the financials, but I bet we will find out that's what happened.
Yeah, and if you're Oregon and Washington, you were in the right to ask for more money in that streaming deal, right? To get a higher percentage than everyone else. And I
Yes.
would imagine everyone else said no to that. And you're right. They could have survived as a 10-team conference with SMU and San Diego State, but they just weren't going to get a lot of money. And this was going to happen eventually. This is all going to happen. And we're seeing this, it's, by 2030, man, we're going to have, I mean, Florida State today, I haven't read that story because I was busy, but like that JP Morgan thing, like
Yeah.
they're trying their darndest to get out of this ACC deal.
Yeah, they're trying to get a war
ASAP.
chest together in case they've
Yeah.
got to pay their way out. And
Yeah.
look, they've said it. I watched that entire Florida State trustees meeting the other day. One of their trustees laid it out very well. They're trying to manage expectations because they have, if they want to get out by next year, they have to declare they're leaving the ACC by August 15th. I don't necessarily think they can get that done. That would be logistically pretty tough. But but one of their trustees said, "Hey, we have to have a plan. If we can't do it by this August 15th, that we are doing it by August 15th, 2024." And that sounds, because that's still pretty soon. Like, that's not far away.
Well, but Andy, this Oregon-Washington thing happened much faster than everyone expected. Everyone said for a year now that they're going to end up there eventually. But most thought it was 26, a short grant of rights in the Pac-12, and they're gone. Or 2029, I think, is the deal when the Big Ten is up with their TV contract. And no one thought it happened this fast, but the Pac-12 deal was just so bad. And I'm really curious to kind of get the autopsy on the Pac-12 deal, because once Brett Yormark jumped, George Klofkoff, I'm not sure there was a deal to be had.
I don't think so either. I think ESPN and Fox were either out or willing to come back at pennies on the dollar, neither of which was viable for the Pac-12. And I'd love to see that, because at did the Pac-12 ever have a Fox ESPN offer before the Big 12 did their deal?
Well, they did before the Big 12.
Yeah.
I mean, before they had the Big 12 deal, essentially, and said no. And I sort of get that. Like, I understand, like, okay, let's pause. Let's see what we can get from elsewhere. They overvalued themselves for sure.
Mm-hmm.
I don't really fault them for initially saying no. I don't think they thought Big 12 would jump in front of them, though, which, are you supposed to know that? I don't really know.
It was surprising. And what's interesting about it, and this is a part that I kind of forgotten about until the Big 12 jumped the line, was that the reason Texas and Oklahoma left the Big 12 or started, talking to the SEC, was the Big 12 tried to renegotiate early in 2021 and were told no. Like, Fox and ESPN were like, nah, we're good. We'll wait.
I mean, it's this, look, I work for Fox Sports. I like working there. I like my bosses, but it is kind of just weird how openly these networks are controlling college sports. I would imagine it's always been this way, right? Like, they've always had some sort of say in it, but just the idea that, Fox went to the Big Ten and went to USC and was like, let's do this thing. And I know there's been interest for USC to go independent for a while, or leave the conference for a while, but just that they're so involved in the process of moving pieces around the chessboard. It's open now, and maybe it was always that way, Andy. We were just not told about it. There wasn't social media to talk about
we were always told that ESPN pulled the strings behind the scenes, and I know a lot of the people there and the executives there. And while there may have been some button pushing, I don't think they were ever complete puppet masters. ESPN, Fox is running the Big Ten right now. Like, Fox is running the Big Ten.
Okay. So, does ESPN have a stake in the SEC network like Fox owns the Big Ten network? Okay.
Yes. It's a little bit different. ESPN runs it and then pays the SEC a percentage. Fox and the Big Ten co-own the Big Ten network, and there's a percentage each, and it just flipped. I can't remember who's got more of it right now. Yeah.
So, that part being out in the open, I think, makes it, just kind of interesting, this whole thing. But, the thing that, to me, the overriding thing is, like, when USC and UCLA left, it was one tweet. John Wilner tweeted out. I remember I was walking out of the airport in Charlotte. I just got back home, and I was like, holy shit. And then when Oklahoma and Texas left, I believe it was like a week before SEC Media Day, like a story.
No, it was at SEC Media Days.
Oh, it was? Okay.
Yeah.
But it was like a week. They're leaving in a week. It was like they were leaving. But there was none of this, like, year-long pursue this. I feel like I would feel so much different about this if it just was, like, announced and moved along.
Yeah.
But we've had a year of this.
I was talking to somebody who's involved with multiple leagues, and that's what they were saying today. The frustrating part on this one was with the SEC taking Oklahoma and Texas, that was fairly buttoned up when it leaked.
Yeah.
The Big Ten taking USC and UCLA was fairly buttoned up when it leaked. This has never leaked. This has played out in public the entire time.
But mostly the Big 12 side of this things, right? Like
Yes.
it was not been the Big 10. I think the Big 10 didn't. I mean, they didn't want to do this. I don't think. They're getting Oregon and Washington at a really discounted rate.
At a discount.
It's a financial
It's a good
great
deal
move
for
for them.
Yeah.
But they didn't have to do this. But the Big 12 has been very aggressive with putting things out there, and it didn't work per se. I mean, I guess in the end they got what they wanted, but it's been just loud, man, and loud and vocal. And now, I mean, I'm gonna Indy. I'm new to kind of covering. I've been doing this for 5 years now, but I'm not like a reporter.
You were busy
right?
playing in the NFL. It's okay.
Yes, I'm not a reporter. I just consider myself like someone who gives opinions on sports, right? And the fact that I'm going to try to tune into a Board of Regents meeting in about, what time is it right now? In about 20 minutes while I have dinner tonight and play with my kids is freaking nuts, buddy. Like, I've never in my life wanted to watch a Board of Regents meeting, but I got to see and Oregon has a new president. The president just got there like 3 months ago.
Well, the old president went to Northwestern. We know all about that.
I know that he's guy. He's like, welcome to the big show, buddy. Because Oregon relatively has not had any scandals for years. I mean, they've been a good athletic department, haven't had issues. And yeah, they have a new president. Like they have all these new parts. The one thing about Oregon, I won't speak to Washington. I don't know the leadership there. I know Jen Cohen, but I don't know any of the presidents or anything. Is Oregon? I trust them, man. Like they built an athletic department from nothing into what it is now, and I trust them. If they think this is the right move, I trust them.
And they want to win the national title in football. They've made that very clear. They've gotten very close.
I know.
Maybe this is what
Michael Dyer was not down. He wasn't. He was down. He was down.
He was not.
His lower leg was down.
He was not down.
Look, his upper tape on his ankles is on the ground.
And all the Auburn fans think I was unnecessarily harsh to that team, but I'm telling you, Michael Dyer was not down. But it's okay. Neither here nor there. Ezekiel Elliott was never down in the other game.
Well,
other time
about
we're going to play for the
Oregon,
national title.
Like in 2010, they have not been 10 and 14 have not been our best teams, which is the way it always works in sports, right? Like our 07 team was better, and then 2012 was our best team. I think they lost to Stanford at home. They got upset. Otherwise, they would have been in the title game as well. Like, it's just crazy how sport works like that.
Well,
did we lose? Am I the only one here? By myself?
Yeah, I thought Dan Ripsey was going to join. I think they're still going on that show. But
yeah, I got off.
I did enjoy. We were on the Solid Verbal with Dan Rubenstein and Ty Hildebrandt, and we were just naming our favorite random Pac-12 and Pac-10 players. It was phenomenal. We had Keith Rivers, Anu Solomon. I mean, that part is very sad to me because it's it's how the sport worked for so long, and you watch most of the games all day, and then you go to Pac-12 after dark. Or I really loved the Thursday Pac-12 games. Now, I know you probably hated this game. There was an Arizona-Oregon game where Arizona beat them on a Thursday night that was just wild, and nobody saw it coming. And like those are the ones I remember.
You mean the game, the one Dennis Dixon tore his ACL in that game?
No, not that one. Not that one. I know the 07 one was just awful. No, I remember watching that one and just
a game in Arizona.
No, I was covering Florida at the time, and so when Dennis tore his ACL, it meant Tim Tebow was probably going to win the Heisman, but that was just sad because Dennis Dixon was amazing to watch.
We were gonna do it all that year, and look, they're still gonna have one. Look, the thing about one thing I always found funny about UCLA and USC bragging about going to the Big Ten was like, we're done with night games. I go, who was playing the late game on Fox on FS1? It was you guys.
Right.
You were playing that game still. So we're still going to have night games. It's just not going to be the Pac-12 after dark. And, it'll take
be the Big Ten after dark.
You'll be like Oregon hosting Iowa.
Listen,
God, it's just so dumb.
I'm here for Wisconsin at Husky Stadium, 10:30 p.m. Eastern time kickoff. Let's go.
I mean, Wisconsin's got to go. So Washington State's hosting their first Power 5 program this year in 25 years. Power 5,
in the non-conference
Power 5 team. Yeah. with the Badgers going to Pullman this year. How about that?
Well,
It's
and the Cougs beat the Badgers last year, so that's and
17-14,
again that's
yeah.
that's the part that sucks about all this, because think about the job Jonathan Smith's done at Oregon State.
He's going to
He's
leave
just
now.
done an
Sucks.
incredible job. I know, and he's an alum, but
Oh, yeah.
like, what do you do?
Look, there was a chance he was leaving anyways, because I think if he had another good season, someone would have thrown $8 million at him and hired him in a heartbeat. But now, if they get relegated to a different conference and their payout goes from even 20 to like 15 or 12, they can't afford to keep him.
Yeah,
Unless someone makes
that's
a
the
lot
thing.
of
I
money.
mean, and some SEC or Big Ten teams going to go, that guy worked a miracle at Oregon State.
Oh,
He
yeah.
can do the same thing here. Yeah.
He's an incredible coach. I'm giving you a tour of my bedroom. I'm sorry. I just can't sit anymore. I just can't sit.
We've probably got to let everybody get back to work, back to driving home, all that. But Geoff Schwartz, I appreciate it. Everybody, thank you. Everybody, thank you for coming in and talking about this. I've seen this a couple times. I'm going to put this on the screen. This is SPTO says, I think it's too much change too soon. They run the risk of turning NCAA football into NASCAR, too big, too fast, and to lead to a collapse in viewership. I think people are underestimating the power of football. While this is not good and this is not fun for a lot of people, it's not NASCAR. Why is it not NASCAR? Because NASCAR is not football. I know there's people out there who like it. Stock car racing is boring. Everybody likes football. And as long as there are games on Saturdays, most fans are going to be like, all right, let's go. Especially if it's between brands that they like to see. Individual fan bases are going to be turned off. But for the most part, they're going to be smaller in number than the ones that are fans of the huge brands or casual fans that just want to see the huge brand. So that's the cold calculus that these TV networks are using to decide who goes where. It sucks, but it is reality, and it is the new reality for college football. My guess, though, is when those games are on and it's two teams you want to see, you're probably still watching. Now it's just going to be a bunch of different teams playing in different places. Don't know what's next. Waiting on you, Arizona State, Utah. We'll see. Thanks for watching. We'll probably be back doing another one of these pretty soon.